The wind howled like a beast through the crumbling towers of Blackthorn Keep. Rain fell in cold sheets, drenching the moss-covered stones, turning the castle's outer walls into slick, glimmering mirrors of darkness. Legends whispered in nearby villages spoke of the Alpha King, once the mightiest ruler in the lands, now chained in the castle's deepest dungeon. Left to die by those he had trusted most, no one dared enter Blackthorn Keep. Its gates were broken, its halls filled with curses, and its shadows alive with unspeakable memories. But she came anyway. Lyra, a healer whose skill was known far beyond her small village, carried no sword, no shield, only a leather satchel filled with herbs, salves, and charms. Her dark cloak billowed behind her as she approached the castle, her boots sinking into the mud of the overgrown courtyard. She did not fear the storm. She did not fear the castle. Only one thought drove her forward. The Alpha King must not die. The villagers had warned her. "He is cursed," they said. "The shadows will devour you." But Lyra did not flinch. She had seen too much death and pain to leave a life to rot in silence. She had learned the power of hope in a world full of darkness. And hope was something she carried like a sword sharper than any blade. The main gate had long since collapsed, leaving a yawning gap that seemed to breathe cold air at her. She stepped inside and felt the weight of the castle's sorrow pressing against her chest. The halls were silent, save for the drip of water from the broken ceiling and the distant echo of a chain's rattle. The air smelled of mold and dust, a mixture of decay and lost power. Her hands tightened on the strap of her satchel. She had come this far, there was no turning back. Descending the spiral staircase that led to the dungeon, Lyra's heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from the pull of destiny. She had seen the king once, many years ago, during a fleeting moment when he rode through the village with his golden guard. His eyes had burned with a fire that seemed untouchable. Now, she would meet him not as a king, but as a prisoner of death. At the bottom of the staircase, the dungeon's walls closed in, cold stone pressing against her like the embrace of a giant. The air was thick and foul, heavy with despair. Shadows clung to the corners, flickering with movement as though alive. She lit a small lantern, the light trembling across the damp walls, revealing old chains, broken weapons, and remnants of prisoners long gone. And then she saw him. He lay on a stone slab in the center of a circular cell, pale and weak, his regal robes tattered and soaked in filth. His hair, once black as midnight, clung to his face in wet strands, but even in his broken state, his presence demanded attention. The Alpha King's eyes opened slowly, a flicker of recognition and disbelief in their depths. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper, but carried the weight of authority even in weakness. "I am Lyra," she said, stepping closer. "I came to help you." He coughed violently, clutching at his chest, and the sight of his suffering tightened a knot in her stomach. She knelt beside him, setting down her satchel, and began to pull out her herbs and salves. Her hands moved with precision, mixing powders with water, whispering words that felt like a song against the darkness. "You should not," he tried. But the words failed him. He could not stop her, and part of him wanted to. Part of him wanted to retreat into his pride, to reject aid from someone he had never met, but there was something in her presence that forced him to stay. Something gentle yet unwavering that made him feel safe in a way he had not felt in decades. Hours passed. Rain pounded above them, water dripping from cracks in the ceiling. Lyra worked tirelessly, binding wounds, administering potions, murmuring encouragement. Slowly, the Alpha King's breathing steadied, his fever breaking, his pale skin regaining color. She had brought with her an ancient charm, a small pendant infused with protective magic, and as she hung it around his neck, a faint glow of warmth spread across his chest. He tried to rise, testing the strength in his limbs, but faltered, leaning heavily on the stone slab. She caught him, her hands steadying his trembling frame. "You are stronger than I thought," she said softly. "You have survived more than anyone could imagine." He looked at her. Truly looked. For the first time, his pride and fury, the years of betrayal and imprisonment, all seemed to mix with something unfamiliar. Gratitude. Perhaps even awe. "And you, risk your life for me?" he asked, his voice now clearer, tinged with wonder. Lyra shook her head. "I risk nothing that I cannot face. You are not meant to die here. Not alone." For the first time in decades, a flicker of vulnerability passed through the Alpha King. He had been a man who ruled with strength and terror, feared by enemies and allies alike. Yet here, in the shadows of the dungeon, he found himself relying on another, and he did not know how to respond to it. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the halls above them, a deep, rumbling growl, unnatural and full of malice. Shadows shifted in the corners, growing thicker, darker, alive with intent. The curse that had bound the castle for centuries stirred. The ground trembled beneath them. Lyra's eyes widened. "They are awake," she whispered. "The guardians, the castle itself does not want you to leave." The Alpha King's eyes narrowed, a flicker of the warrior returning. He tried to stand, but his strength was not yet fully returned. Lyra offered him her arm, and he accepted it, his pride bowing to necessity. Together, they moved toward the staircase that would lead them out of the dungeon. The shadows seemed to reach for them, tendrils of darkness curling like serpents. The air was thick with magic, old and angry, as if the castle itself resented their defiance. Lyra whispered words of protection, and the charm around his neck pulsed faintly, holding back the darkness. "You have a fire in you," the Alpha King said quietly, his voice now steady. "A courage I thought was lost to this world." "And you have a spark," Lyra replied, "buried under all the pain." "I see it." As they ascended the staircase, the shadows multiplied, swirling faster, trying to block their path. The Alpha King stumbled, but she held him firmly. In that moment, he understood something profound. He had been broken, not only in body, but in spirit, and she was the first to see him as more than a king, more than a symbol, more than a prisoner of vengeance and pride. They reached the final landing when a low, ominous roar shook the castle walls. From the darkness, a massive shadow, part beast, part living darkness, lunged toward them. The Alpha King acted instinctively, stepping between Lyra and the creature, raising his arms in defiance. Even in weakness, his presence commanded the shadows to pause, hesitate. "You," he breathed, eyes locked on hers. "Stay behind me." "No," Lyra said firmly. "We face this together." He hesitated, then nodded, understanding the truth in her words. They would not survive unless they trusted one another completely. And in that trust, something unspoken began to form, a bond forged in danger, despair, and the spark of something neither fully understood yet. The shadows hissed, the storm outside reaching a deafening pitch. Lightning struck the castle towers, illuminating the Alpha King's determined face and Lyra's unwavering gaze. In that flash, he realized that he would not simply be a king saved from death. He would be a man changed, perhaps forever, by the one who dared to rescue him. And then, as the creature lunged again, he whispered words that would haunt her for the rest of their journey. "If I live, I will follow you, wherever you lead." Even into the darkness itself, Lyra's heart quickened. She had not expected a promise like that. And neither had he. The storm howled, the shadows closed in, and the castle trembled with ancient fury. Together, they faced the first test of what would become a bond neither of them could ignore. The Alpha King, broken yet unbowed, and Lyra, brave and unyielding, stepped into the unknown, and the castle waited, silent and watching, as the night held its breath. The storm outside Blackthorn Keep had not relented. Rain lashed against broken windows, and thunder shook the castle's foundations, as if the heavens themselves were furious. Inside, the air was thick with damp and old magic. Shadows danced along the stone walls, shifting and stretching unnaturally. Lyra and the Alpha King moved cautiously, each step a delicate balance between speed and caution. The dungeon's exit led them to a narrow corridor lined with ancient tapestries. Their images faded and distorted, depicting battles, sacrifices, and kings long forgotten. The Alpha King's eyes traced the images, a shadow of sorrow crossing his face. "I once walked these halls as a ruler," he said softly. "And now, I am only a man trying to survive." Lyra did not answer immediately. Her hands adjusted the strap of her satchel, ensuring her herbs and charms were secure. "A king is more than a crown," she said finally. "You still carry power, even here. The question is, what will you do with it?" He looked at her, a flicker of uncertainty in his golden eyes. "I do not know," he admitted. "For so long, power has been my only shield. Without it, I am nothing." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Then let me help you find what comes after power." The Alpha King's lips pressed together. Pride warred with vulnerability. He wanted to reject her, to stand alone as he always had. And yet, in this dark castle, with its shadows alive and its history of betrayal echoing through every stone, he could not. Not when she was here. Holding a light that seemed to pierce even the deepest darkness, they continued down the corridor until they reached a staircase leading upward. Each step groaned beneath their weight, echoing through the castle like a warning. When they emerged into a grand hall, it was almost unrecognizable. The ceiling had partially collapsed, and the once gilded walls were cracked and blackened. Dust and debris lay thick on the marble floor. The throne at the far end was shattered, splintered wood jutting out like jagged teeth. "This was my kingdom," the Alpha King murmured, his voice heavy with regret. He stepped closer to the ruined throne, running his hand over the broken armrest. "I failed them all." Lyra followed him, her eyes scanning the room for danger. "You failed the throne, maybe," she said gently, "but not the people who needed you. You are still alive. That means something." He turned to her, his gaze intense, searching her face as if trying to understand the depth of her belief in him. "And you? Why do you care so much for a broken king?" Lyra hesitated. Her heart beat faster, and she felt the weight of the unspoken truth between them. "Because no one deserves to die alone. Not even kings," she said finally. For a moment, silence fell between them, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. In that silence, they understood each other without words. Two souls, scarred by life and bound by necessity, moving through a castle that seemed alive with memories, pain, and magic. Suddenly, a chill swept through the hall. The shadows along the walls writhed and shifted, gathering into darker, more tangible forms. Shapes emerged, creatures twisted and half-formed, made of shadow and malice, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They had been lying in wait, drawn by the king's presence and the stirrings of life in the castle. The Alpha King stepped in front of Lyra instinctively, his posture commanding, his aura flaring faintly despite his weakness. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice steady and full of authority. "No," Lyra said firmly, "we face this together." He hesitated, then nodded. The shadows advanced, hissing and swirling, their forms attempting to envelop them. Lyra pulled out a small vial from her satchel and shattered it on the floor. A bright, sharp light exploded outward, forcing the shadows to recoil. She whispered words of power, charms moving in her hands like dancing flames, pushing the creatures back. The Alpha King clenched his fists, his aura glowing stronger now. He raised his voice, a deep, commanding tone that echoed through the hall. The shadows faltered, then shrieked in fury. Together, they pressed forward, moving past the creatures with a rhythm that seemed almost choreographed. Lyra's knowledge of magic and herbs combined with his raw power, creating a balance that neither had experienced before. Finally, they reached the center of the hall, where the shattered throne still stood. There, hidden beneath rubble, they discovered a small, ancient chest. Its lid was carved with runes, worn by time and covered in dust. Lyra's fingers traced the symbols, whispering their meanings softly. "The curse. It was not just placed on the throne," she said. "It is tied to the bloodline itself. Someone betrayed your family, long ago. The Alpha King's face darkened. Betrayal, he repeated bitterly. It has followed me all my life. And yet, I cannot change the past. No, Lyra said, but you can choose what comes next. Together, they opened the chest. Inside lay an ornate crown, blackened and twisted by the curse. Alongside a sealed scroll. The scroll contained the details of the betrayal. A trusted advisor, jealous of the Alpha King's power, had conspired with dark forces to weaken him and claim the throne. The curse had ensured the kingdom's decay, leaving the king imprisoned and broken. Lyra handed the scroll to him. The truth is painful, she said softly, but knowing it gives you a choice. You can reclaim your life, or let it continue to control you. He held the scroll, his hands trembling slightly, torn between anger, grief, and the spark of something unfamiliar hope. I have lived in darkness for so long, he murmured. I do not know if I can trust myself anymore. Lyra stepped closer. Then trust me, she said. Trust that, together, we can face the shadows and make a new path. The Alpha King looked into her eyes, seeing determination and courage that mirrored his own, and felt a stirring within him that he had not felt in years. It was not power, not revenge, but something quieter and more profound, a connection, a bond that promised renewal if he dared to embrace it. As he reached for the crown, a sudden crash echoed through the hall. From the shattered windows above, more shadows poured in, drawn to the light of life and hope. The castle trembled as if recognizing the attempt to reclaim what had been lost. The Alpha King drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of his ancestors' failures and the hopes of the future pressing upon him. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Together, they prepared to face the rising darkness, their hearts aligned in a pact of trust, courage, and unspoken emotion. Then, he did the unthinkable. He turned to Lyra, his eyes glowing with fierce determination. I will leave the throne behind, he said, his voice a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. If you come with me, we will face whatever comes. Together. Lyra's breath caught. She had expected courage, but not this. Not a king willing to surrender centuries of pride for the chance to follow someone else, to trust in another heart as much as his own. She began. But words failed her. Before she could respond, the shadows lunged again, faster and more furious than before. The storm outside reached a deafening crescendo, lightning illuminating the hall in blinding flashes. The Alpha King and Lyra stood side by side, ready to fight, to run, to survive, but more importantly, ready to trust each other fully. The hall became a whirlwind of shadow and light, of courage and fear, of desperation and determination. And in the midst of it all, a bond began to solidify, stronger than magic, stronger than curses, stronger than the darkness itself. Lyra whispered, almost to herself, "We will survive this. Together." The Alpha King nodded, his golden eyes fixed on the shadows that threatened them, yet brighter than they had been in decades. Together, he agreed, and as the night raged on, the castle seemed to shiver, aware that its darkest secret was no longer untouchable, and that the healer and the broken king were rising. Not only to challenge the shadows, but to forge a new destiny that neither could have imagined alone. The storm had passed, leaving the castle drenched in moonlight. Broken towers cast long shadows over the courtyard, and the wind whispered through shattered windows like voices from the past. The Alpha King and Lyra stood in the throne hall, surrounded by the aftermath of the battle with the shadows. The hall was scarred, the floor blackened in places where the shadows had burned themselves out, and shards of the throne lay scattered around them. Yet, amid the destruction, there was a calm, a fragile stillness that spoke of survival and renewal. The Alpha King sank to one knee before the remnants of the throne, the weight of his lineage pressing on him. He held the crown in his hands, its darkened surface reflecting the flickering light. The cursed object was no longer just a symbol of power, it was a reminder of betrayal, suffering, and the price of ambition. He traced the carvings with his fingers, feeling the history of his ancestors in each groove. Lyra approached quietly, her steps measured. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "You do not have to carry it alone," she said softly. "The past cannot be changed, but what comes next, that is yours to decide." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with the weight of years and the glimmer of something new hope. "For so long, I have believed that power defined me," he admitted, "that my strength alone was my worth. And yet, here I am, alive because of another. Because of you." Lyra shook her head, her dark hair falling over her shoulders like a veil. "It was not just me. It was your courage too. You never gave up entirely. You held on, even when the world turned against you." A faint smile crossed the Alpha King's lips. A rare, unguarded expression. "Perhaps," he said, "but courage alone is not enough. One needs guidance, someone to see what is hidden, someone to remind a man that even kings are human." Lyra's heart quickened. The air between them carried the weight of unspoken emotions, a tension that neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. They had faced death together, confronted the darkness that had long held his kingdom, and survived. In that survival, they had discovered trust, respect, and the fragile beginnings of something more. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the hall. Lyra's hand instinctively moved to the pendant around the Alpha King's neck, which pulsed faintly with protective magic. Shadows, weaker but still present, began to gather at the edges of the room. The curse had not been fully broken. Its heart remained, tied not only to the throne but to the lineage itself. The Alpha King rose, his stature commanding even after everything he had endured. "Then we finish this," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Whatever remains, we face it together." Lyra nodded, pulling a small vial from her satchel. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, imbued with a spell to weaken the lingering curse. She handed it to him. "This will help," she said, "but only your strength and will can end it completely." He accepted it, his fingers brushing hers for a moment longer than necessary. A warmth passed between them, unspoken and profound. He drank the potion, feeling the magic flow through his veins, amplifying his power without corrupting it. The shadows recoiled, hissing and writhing as if sensing the shift in the balance of power. With a roar that echoed through the halls, the Alpha King raised his arms, calling forth the full force of his aura. Light and shadow collided, a storm of magic and willpower that tore through the remnants of the curse. Lyra chanted alongside him, her voice steady, weaving protection and guidance into the surge of energy. The battle was fierce but brief. The shadows screeched and dissolved, their forms collapsing into nothingness as the combined force of the Alpha King and Lyra's magic cleansed the hall. The curse, centuries old and rooted in betrayal, was finally broken. The throne, though still shattered, no longer radiated darkness. A calm, almost reverent silence filled the hall. Breathing heavily, the Alpha King lowered his arms, his chest rising and falling with exertion. Lyra approached him, placing a hand on his arm to steady him. "It is done," she whispered. He looked at her, the fire of his eyes softened by gratitude and something deeper. "It is," he said, "because of you." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of everything they had endured, everything they had lost, and everything they had gained. The storm outside had passed, and in the quiet, the Alpha King realized something that had eluded him for years. Power was not in a crown or a throne. Power was in connection, in trust, in the courage to stand beside someone and face the darkness together. He turned to Lyra, kneeling before her, not as a king demanding obedience, but as a man offering his heart. "I have taken many lives, commanded many armies, and carried a kingdom's weight," he said quietly. "But I have never known what it means to surrender, to trust, to care. Until now." Lyra's breath caught. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he had never shown to anyone. "You do not have to say more," she said softly. "Actions speak louder than words." He reached for her hand, holding it gently, as if afraid to break the fragile trust they had built. "Then let me show you," he said. "Let me show you the man I am, beyond the crown, beyond the kingdom, beyond the shadow that haunted me." The moonlight poured through the broken windows, illuminating their faces. For the first time, the Alpha King smiled, not the proud, untouchable smile of a ruler, but a quiet, genuine expression of a man who had been broken and found redemption. Lyra felt a warmth in her chest she had not expected. She had healed him, yes, but in the process, she had discovered something in herself as well, a bond that transcended fear, pride, and the weight of the past. They had saved each other. In ways neither could have anticipated, a sudden breeze whispered through the hall, carrying the scent of rain and earth. The castle seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the shift in its long-held balance. The Alpha King stood and extended his hand to her. "Come," he said, his voice lighter now. "There is a world beyond this castle. A world we can face together." Lyra took his hand, feeling the strength in it, the weight of history and the promise of a future. Together, they stepped forward, leaving the remnants of the throne behind. Stepping into the moonlit corridors that led to freedom, as they walked, the Alpha King spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I once believed that no one could ever truly understand me, that no one could see the man beneath the crown. But you have seen me, and you have seen me." Lyra replied, "The healer is only a guide. The true strength was always in you. And now, perhaps, we can find it together." The halls opened into the castle courtyard, where the first light of dawn broke through the lingering clouds. The storm had cleansed not only the castle but also a part of themselves. The Alpha King looked around, taking in the ruined towers, the shattered gates, and the path that led into the forest beyond. He turned to Lyra, a playful glint in his eyes for the first time in decades. "Shall we leave the past behind us?" he asked. She smiled, feeling the weight of their shared trials lift slightly. "Yes," she said. "But we carry its lessons with us, always." Together, they stepped into the morning light, leaving the shadows of Blackthorn Keep behind. The curse was broken, the kingdom's darkness lifted, and a new path lay before them, uncertain, but filled with hope, trust, and the promise of a bond forged in fire and shadow. For the Alpha King, redemption was no longer a distant dream. It was here, in the hands of the healer who had risked everything to save him, and in the trust they had built together. And for Lyra, the journey had not only healed the king but had awakened something within her as well, a recognition that courage, love, and loyalty could overcome even the deepest darkness. The forest beyond the castle awaited them, its paths winding and mysterious, yet inviting. Birds began to sing in the distance, the first signs of life returning to the world, and as they walked side by side, neither spoke of the throne, the crown, or the shadows. Words were unnecessary. They had survived the impossible together, and that was enough. The Alpha King glanced at Lyra once more, a silent promise in his eyes. "No matter the future, I will follow you. And together, we will face whatever comes." Lyra met his gaze and squeezed his hand. "I will follow you too." And so, they disappeared into the forest, leaving Blackthorn Keep behind, broken, haunted, but no longer alive with darkness. In their place walked two souls, forever changed, bound by courage, trust, and a bond that would endure beyond curses, thrones, and shadows. The night was over. The dawn had come, and with it, a chance at redemption, love, and a future neither had dared to imagine.